This video is going to cover what is the best rear grip attachment to use within Black Ops 6. We've got a couple of different options here. The quick draw grip, which helps to aim down sight, the assault grip, which helps to sprint to fire, commando grip, which helps a bit of both, ergonomic grip helps to slide to fire, dive to fire, aim down sight, and then we've got the CQB, which helps with dive to fire, slide to fire, and sprint to fire. If we look at the in-game stats, which you can see just below the camera right now, you can see that we can get the aim down sight, sprint to fire, and slide to fire stats with all these attachments, of course. But the one thing it doesn't give you is a dive to fire, which we did calculate ourselves, so we'll cover that in just a moment. So like I said, we did test also the dive to fire speeds, which are not actually in the game at the moment. So it's not a stat we can easily check. So we did go in and calculate this, and how we actually done it is we actually tested the dive, and then we held the fire button to see how quickly the weapon would fire after we entered the dive animation. Now, how we did this exactly was we've got a couple of markers here. So what we wanted to do was test the marker when your hand appears on the screen here. So as you can see, just right there, that indicates that the dive animation has started. Now, it probably has started a little bit earlier than this, but this was the best indication for us to see that the dive animation started and keep all the testing consistent after this. And then obviously we held the fire button as long as we could, and until the weapon actually fired its first shot, which we could see goes down to 29 bullets there. And that's what we've done for every single one of these attachments. But also I do want to mention that, for example, the ergonomic and the CQB grip do help with dive to fire and slide to fire speeds, but that only means when you're firing the weapon, by the way. It doesn't help with like ADS speeds whilst you're diving or sliding, which would be a huge benefit. So getting into the actual numbers now, as per usual, the 4 weapons we tested was the PU-21 LMG, the XM4, the AEK-973, the Tanto. So we're going to go through each weapon individually here, and this is obviously going to summarize those weapon categories. So for example, we've got the PU-21, which is an LMG, of course. Now what we've done, in green we've highlighted what is the fastest attachment for that particular stat. So if you do just want like the fastest ADS, for example, then the quick draw will give you the fastest ADS for the PU-21, of course. And then the assault will give you the fastest sprint to fire. The CQB would give you the fastest dive to fire. And the ergonomic or the CQB would give you the fastest slide to fire. Now, what I do want to talk about here, because it's not quite as easy just picking what's the fastest one, is we need to talk about the base stats here, because the ADS is 435. The sprint to fire is 245, the dive to fire is 523, and the slide to fire is 410. So what I would do if I was selecting the best attachment for the particular weapon that I'm using, which is the PU-21, I'd focus on the stats that I do think are important, but also try to reduce the kind of more higher end of these stats. So for example, the ADS is very slow on this weapon. The sprint to fire is relatively slow, to be honest. And if it can be improved upon, we can, but for the most part, I do want to focus on the dive to fire as well, because I think that those 2 stats are the highest out of the bunch. And to get that one, that improvement, then the ergonomic grip is going to be the best, because it helps the most with the dive to fire and also the ADS at the same time, because obviously the CQB doesn't help with ADS. Similarly, we've got the AEK, which represents all the marksman rifles. This is the burst fire one. And again, if you just want the fastest ADS, quick draw. If you want the fastest sprint to fire, assault. If you want the fastest dive to fire, then it will be the CQB. And if you want the fastest slide to fire, then you've got the ergonomic or the CQB. But again, if you want to look at the base stats and try and figure out what's the best overall, then again, the ADS is pretty slow on this weapon. The sprint to fire is not too bad. The dive to fire is pretty slow. And the slide to fire is pretty slow, but also you need to consider what you do the most in this game as well. If you slide the most, then obviously you want the better sliding stats. If you dive a lot, then you want the better diving stats. If you just sprint around the map normally, then obviously you want the better sprint to fire. And ADS is always going to be important anyway, so I do think ADS is just something you should try and improve regardless. But personally for me, I slide more than I dive, so that is why I do prefer the ergonomic. Next up, we've got the XM4, which represents all the assault rifles now. And again, quick draw is the best for ADS, assault is the best for sprint to fire, dive to fire is the CQB, and then slide to fire is both the ergonomic or CQB once again. Like I said, again, you need to focus on which stats you want to improve the most. I, again, will probably go for the ergonomic in this case. I mean, sprint to fire is slightly better on assault rifles than it is on the other 2 weapon categories, so I wouldn't really focus too much on it on this particular category for weapons, so that is why I do think ergonomic on the assault rifles is definitely the best choice. Next up, we've got the Tanto, which is an SMG, representing all the SMGs. Again, if you want the best ADS, you want to go for the quick draw. If you want the best sprint to fire, you go for the assault. If you want the best dive to fire, this time you go for ergonomic, which is what we calculated in game. Now, the Tanto does have an open bolt delay, if I'm correct, and this might be taken into consideration of this as well, by the way. So just ergonomic is the best. We have tested it a couple of different times and got an average. And then slide to fire is both of the CQB or the ergo grip. Then, like I said, when it comes to sprint to fire, I just can't see how we can improve this without trying to improve some of the more important stats here, especially if you're coming to movement. So in this video, there's no real conclusion besides the fact that my personal preference is the ergonomic grip, right? That doesn't really mean that this is the best grip, because it really depends on what movement stats you find to be the most important, because you cannot equip the ergonomic grip and then look for an attachment that gives you better aim down sight speeds, because there's no such thing, right? Even the rear grips don't help with aim down sight. They only help with aim walking speeds or strafing speeds or movement speeds. No lasers help with aim down sight or sprint to fire, so as you can see here, no lasers are helping with any of those stats, which is a bit disappointing, to be honest. No underbarrels help with any of those stats. So again, this is aim down sight focus, which is a whole other stat altogether. This has nothing to do with aim down sight speed. And then, like I said, so the rest of these attachments don't really help with the same stats as the rear grip. So you do really need to pick wisely here on which movement you do the most. And personally for me, it's sliding. I slide around a lot in this game. So that is why I've picked the pros to be the slide to fire speed the best. And then obviously we're getting a slight benefit to aim down sight and dive to fire as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.